computer. Yeah, let's do that. All right, we are recording. Now I'm going to go ahead and share the screen in just a second. I cannot minimize Zoom when you are recording. Well, that is a new thing to learn. Okay. Okay, well, then you're just going to have to, hopefully none of you are going to be too over. I'm going to share my screen. And then I'm going to have to go out here, and you guys are going to look at my thing. And if you were Dan Ohl, you'd be crying. Can you all see my screen just fine?
I've got a thing going round and round and round.
Oh,
I can see that you're trying to share, yes, but
okay.
It hasn't synced up yet. Also, I don't use Zoom ever, so I don't really know. I would have expected it to give me some sort of indication that you're recording, and I don't see it.
I will double check that.
The upper left-hand corner.
There's like a blinky dot somewhere is what I've been told.
Right, that thing that says recording, big red.
Yeah,
Really?
it says
Okay.
I see it says recording, but nothing is started screening yet.
My screen is paused. Why is my screen paused?
Because mine is holding you up.
I don't think so. Let me try this. Okay.
And it says Matt Packard has started screen sharing.
Okay, let's try this again. Screen share.
Nope.
How about that?
There we go.
You should hopefully see like a night scene with a boat on a beach.
Yes.
The giant moon.
Yes. Yes. I see a thing that says recording, and I see everybody's face on one side.
Oh, wonderful. You can actually see the faces
That's
too.
I can see the
interesting.
faces.
I don't see anything about recording still, but I'll trust you all.
It's in the upper right-hand corner.
Don't worry, I don't see anything either, Joe, so I'm just glad they do.
Yeah, I upper right corner, no
Upper right
indication,
corner.
but that's cool. That's cool.
All right. So, maybe I should hold my beer and, I'll get like sponsorship ads. All right, let's go. So today's question is, how do we know that there is a heaven?
That's a great question. How do we know?
How do we know, right? And it's a much more complicated question than one would think it should be, mainly because the big question is, what do you mean when you say the word heaven? And we're going to get into that deeply today, which those of you who are here for the mortal versus immortal soul discussion a number of months ago, some of this will seem a little familiar to you. If not, it'll be it'll be all brand new and just as fun as first. All right. I got to move this little box around if you guys can see the box. The ways of understanding the word heaven. So heaven could refer to a location where God resides, right? So like right now, if I was to ask most people and I say, where is God? You'd either say God is everywhere, or God is in heaven, or God is in heaven and everywhere else too, right? That fair? Right? Heaven could also refer to a location where we reside until the bodily resurrection, right? So you die, you go to heaven. That's another way people will talk about heaven, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But you could also talk about heaven as a place you reside after the bodily resurrection. In other words, heaven on earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk about, the Lord will make his kingdom come, his will be done on heaven as it is on earth. So heaven comes to earth. We are all bodily resurrected. We hear that over and over in the Bible, and it's in the creeds, right? We believe in the bodily resurrection. Or bodily resurrection.
Yes.
Okay. So from a previous Pub-Theology episode, here's our recap. There is a debate on the soul we learned about of a mortal soul versus an immortal soul. This is very important because depending on where you fall as to whether or not the soul is mortal or immortal, you will have different categories for what heaven might be or is. Quick review, for some Christians, And in fact, this is a very weird situation because it is a situation where almost all denominations cross family groups. So evangelicals, mainlines, Roman Catholics, Coptics, Eastern Orthodox, across these groups, the church bodies believe more or less the same thing, but the people who attend church believe something different. Also across denominations and across Christian family groups. Okay? Because what almost all denominations teach is that God resides in heaven, you pass away. When you pass away, your soul goes to sleep for a period of time, and then you are awoken on the final day. Okay? That is the idea that the soul is mortal, as in it dies with the body and is therefore either resurrected with the body or not resurrected with the body, because you cannot tear the soul from the body. They're connected. Okay? The immortal idea of the soul is that the soul is in some way separate from the body or can exist outside the body, and therefore the soul cannot be destroyed. Or you would have to actively destroy it in like the fiery pits of hell or something. But even in the immortal soul, that's why you're there for eternity. Okay? So in the immortal concept of this is the idea you die, your body dies, and then your soul's got to have a place to go, at least until the final resurrection. Okay? Until you're bodily resurrect at some point, which adds another step if we're talking about heaven. You guys following me so far? This gets really strange, or at least really complicated really fast, right?
This is good.
Okay. So let's just review. I got to move this thing again. Here we go. All right. So here we go. So if the soul was mortal, in this understanding, when you die, your soul goes to sleep, and then, if worthy, wakes up as part of the bodily resurrection, so you essentially have three stages of life. You're alive, and while you're alive, God is not physically on earth, right? Unless you're alive when Jesus is. I'm gonna expand this. I want to see people, but if you can't see, because I like to see your reactions to see if I'm completely everybody with my ramblings. Just please talk if you have any questions, because I can now no longer see you. All right, so you're alive. God is presumably not on earth. Then you pass away, and your soul goes to sleep, but you're not really anywhere because your soul is mortal, so it goes with your body. And then God resurrects everyone like he did Jesus on the last day, who is supposed to be there with him. So the bodily resurrection with God on earth, or depending on your theology, maybe not. Okay. Obviously, that maybe not, as we talked about in our hell section, is a sort of optional maybe not, depending on whether or not you embrace universalism or not.
Does it matter how our physical body is put to rest? Is there a thought on that? I mean, I know, before we had embalming, you just basically, ended up decomposing and laying in, the earth or wherever, or maybe not even. And now we're, or even being cremated. So is there any really theology on that, or is that just a, that's because some people are like, I got to keep my body intact because otherwise my, my soul won't find me or something like that, or, or I won't be able to be resurrected,
Very.
What is that body going to look like? The body is going to really be that physical body that you were given, or is it going to look like something else? So
great questions. Okay, so theologically, Christianity is all over the map on this, but has been probably in the last 200 or 300 years coming together more and more. Okay, and the consensus overwhelmingly in Christianity, and I say consensus within mainline Protestantism, consensus is also the same within evangelical Protestantism, consensus is the same within Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Church of the East, all the major groups, we've all headed in the same direction on this, which is that it does not matter what happens to your body, okay? Whether or not you're cremated, whether or not you're buried, whether or not you have all your limbs, that itself does not matter, because if God can conquer death, he can conquer whatever might have happened to your body. Okay. That has been a major move, though, over the last 300 years. Mainline Protestants and almost all evangelicals have always been okay with whatever happens with your body. There was a period of time in Catholicism, mostly within medieval Catholicism, where some corners of it, particularly Marianite corners in Spain, got the idea that if you lost your arm and it wasn't near your body, you wouldn't be able to find it when you resurrected. This theological idea got transposed to Central and South American religiosity, which in certain parts, particularly in Central America, matched up with indigenous belief systems, in which they had, in the indigenous belief systems, an idea that you would die, you would go to a sort of afterlife, but it was an in-between world, sort of a world of the ghosts, very close to the world of the ghosts that Buddhists believe in. And then you could cross back and forth on certain holidays to revisit your relatives, but only if your relatives remembered you and wanted you to visit them.
Like remembering the Day of the Dead or the Hallows Eve, right? I mean,
Yes.
only if your relatives, just like the movie, if everybody's seen the movie.
Yes,
Coco,
yep, just like Coco.
Your relatives have to remember you, otherwise if you're forgotten.
Absolutely. And so obviously lots of different indigenous religions there, sort of First Nation religions, but there was this theme, particularly in Mexico and South. Oh, did I cut you off? You stopped. I couldn't hear you on mine. You still there, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. I didn't cut you off, did I?
No.
Okay, your video stopped, and then I realized it had stopped rather than you stopping. So I wanted to make sure I didn't cut you off. So you had this matchup, and that's exactly where Dia de los Muertos comes from, because it's those two things that get mixed. And so particularly within Mexican, Hispanic Catholicism, and again, down into Central America, as you get further into South America, especially the parts that are settled by the Portuguese, it's not as much of a thing. So it's not particularly big in Brazil, but you will find it in Colombia, Venezuela, but that's sort of where it starts to peter out as an idea. And so what ends up happening is you do have this idea that gets strongly believed for hundreds of years in those areas. It's worth noting, I grew up in San Antonio, and the greatly venerated Archbishop Flores, who was the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of San Antonio, did public service announcements every year telling people you can get cremated. It's really okay. The church is okay with that. Here is the actual teaching. So I grew up with that being like the public service announcements around Easter and around Christmas every year from Archbishop Flores. So you have that. You also do have some evangelicals, particularly within the holiness movement, that do occasionally sort of go in that direction from time to time, or in certain pietist corners, but it's never been a very big thing in the evangelical world. It sort of comes and goes, but runs around the Seventh-day Adventist crew, Swedish Covenant crews gone down that road a few times and they pulled themselves back. Those groups. Any other questions? That's a great question. Did I answer the whole question?
You did great. I'm sorry if I put you down the wrong track, but I just wanted
This
to.
is Pub-Theology. Every track is the right track.
Good. Because I'm always surprised. I'm a little bit surprised sometimes where what people of my mom's generation, more and more are embracing cremation.
Absolutely.
Like I was I'm not surprised, I guess, but and I'm sometimes surprised by the people who do embrace it or have embraced it, when their funeral does come around or their end, that's the way they've chosen. And it was like, oh, okay, interesting. I mean, just would have thought that is not yet in that generation of people has not maybe caught on as much. I don't know, but it's not caught on. I shouldn't say caught on, but
Certainly, I mean, I can I can count on no hands and no fingers how many times my cousins have been, and I have been to the graveyard where my father's parents are. And I'm the only one that goes to where my parents and my mother's parents are. And that's more because I know where both of them are and they're both here in the state and I'm the one who's closest.
Right.
But is it because we don't go to the graveyard to pay respects anymore or do some of those things that people did?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not near where my parents and my ancestors are all buried anymore because I'm here and everybody else is, all my old, ancestors are, 150 miles away or some more. But yeah, it's interesting because my one cousin does ancestry, so he actually, as a part of one of our reunions one year, did a cemetery walk and showed us. He's done it a couple times and showed us where everybody, especially multiple, especially sisters of people who married other people whose last names were different and everything. So that's interesting. I mean, especially from a ancestry type, situation that way. So anyway, yeah, I don't know.
I think
And more people, it's going to be the mausoleum or the like us, for us in our church, the columbarium. That'll be, maybe where people, family or whatever, will come to pay respects. So
How much?
Absolutely.
It's not cheap.
Yeah.
Right.
So I might have missed the end of what you said there, but it was reminding me of something I learned about not that long ago. There's these natural burial sites that I guess they're not really legal in most places, but in Washington they are.
Yeah, I
That sounds
think
like a pretty neat idea.
right.
plant
Roll
a
you up in a burlap sack and throw you in, I don't know. But anyway,
Yeah,
it's
yeah. Let
very
your
green.
body let
It's
your
very
body feed
green.
nature.
Right.
Right. There is such a thing that you can get. It's like I don't know exactly how it works, but you will grow a tree. It's a tree, the tree seed that's in there.
Yeah, it was something like that I had first heard about. And
Or
unfortunately, it
you could,
seems
or
it's
you
not
could
really
be
common.
put under like high pressure. All your remains could be put under high pressure, and then you could be made into a little like
You can.
stone, a little diamond. And then you
I've
could
seen that.
Some people. Mhm.
stardust compressed. It
They
could be a
wear the
little bit of an asteroid. And then you could be worn around the neck of your loved one or something.
That's right. Yep. I have seen people that have done that.
Absolutely.
All right. So then are they carrying their soul around with them too? And that
So it depends, right? So like in the mortal idea, when you die, your soul is not
with you?
there.
It's not there. Okay.
It's not there.
Not
Because your soul dies with your body. That's why it's called the idea of the soul's being mortal.
there.
Okay. Which is what most denominations believe in the world, but not what most people believe in the world.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Right? There's this huge divide. Second, I'm trying to go
Isn't there like something about how when you're born into the world, that soul comes out of a place and goes into your body, comes into you, and it's joined up with you and your human body. And then once you do depart, that soul leaves, goes like, I don't know. It's probably one of those. It's probably one of those Keanu Reeves movies that I've watched, like Constantine or something like that.
So the history of the debate is we are pretty sure that like in the Bible you have no real talk of the soul as immortal. There are some things you can interpret it that way, okay? But anything you can interpret for the immortality of the soul, you could also interpret it for the mortality of the soul. So the Bible's really unclear. And we'll get into that in a minute. But then from there, what you see is the patristic era. So those are the leaders of the church just after the apostles passed away. So they are the first generation who would have learned from the apostles. Okay. And they basically, these fathers and mothers of the church, lead the church until about the time of the creeds. So they are the group that puts together the creeds. They are the group that puts together the Bible. Okay. And we know that that group, for the most part, would have believed in the mortality of the soul from their writings. It really isn't until you get closer and closer, or really you get past the Apostles' Creed, that you start to have a debate where there is a side arguing for the immortality of the soul. In fact, when you look at the creeds, none of them, all of them, in the way they speak about it, speak of the soul as mortal. That's why Jesus descends into heaven, or descends into hell, and then joins at the right-hand side of his Father. But it says, we will be resurrected on the final day. It never says we will go to heaven and then be resurrected on the final day. Because those church mothers and fathers that write that would have been on the mortal side of the argument. In fact, there wouldn't have been another side at that point, or at least not in any major group. It is really after the creeds that you start to get more and more ideas. And that's getting pulled in from Greek philosophy, because Greek philosophy really, really holds to the immortality of the soul. And so as you have people who are trained in Greek philosophy reading the Bible, they go, no, hold on, this sounds like immortality. This sounds like immortality. And so you have two camps start to develop. So in the immortality, this is the one we're more used to. You're alive. God's not physically on earth. He's somewhere else. Then you die, you go to heaven, or if you're Catholic, maybe you go to purgatory, or maybe you go to hell. That's why I have question marks about those, because those are sort of more optional things. To get into that as a much different sort of discussion. And then after heaven, you're bodily resurrected. If there are these other two spots, then maybe you don't get bodily resurrected, again, because we don't know if these exist or not, or at least those are at least up for debate. They're not necessary for the system. This may not also be necessary for the system. But it does leave you with three things that could possibly be heaven, because you'd have the place God resides, the place you reside until the second coming, and then the place you reside eternally with God post second coming. So what does the Bible tell us about each idea of heaven? The Bible talks extensively about the afterlife insofar as the bodily resurrection. We hear it from Jesus, we hear it from the apostles, we hear it all throughout. There's hundreds of different citations where they talk about kingdom on earth, where they talk about the final days, where they talk about eternal life with Christ, that sort of stuff. So if you're talking specifically about that, you're talking specifically about this piece right here, tons in the Bible about it. It'd be very hard to deny the existence of this. Bible is crystal clear that God does reside somewhere that is not earth and is not a physical realm. It isn't like I can get in a spaceship and find God. Okay, outside of maybe a metaphorical way. But we won't land on Mars someday and God be like, dude, you finally made it to me. That's not how that works. Okay. Again, back to our previous models, both of them also have this transcendent place that God resides. And there is, by the way, a whole line of debate as to who is there with God. Because the Bible's very clear that God is there, and that Jesus is there, and that the Holy Spirit is there, and that the angels are there. But then, is Elijah there? Did Peter get there? Right? Because God says, Jesus says, you'll sit on my right hand. One on the right, one on the left. So is Peter hanging out there? And if he is he like the only dude? Is it just like the four of them? Because that seems boring. But who knows? And so either those sort of things, you're gonna have tons of references throughout the Bible, both Old Testament, New Testament, all over the place. You're talking hundreds and hundreds of references. Is one of the core things the Bible spends a lot of time talking about, is those two locations. So what's really up for debate? Well, what's up for debate is the idea that you go hang out in heaven with God until the bodily resurrection. Well, there are many passages that can be read to support this idea. Those same passages can also be interpreted either as a metaphor in a few cases, or pointing to one of these other locations, as in the after living with God eternally, after the body resurrection, or the place where God resides. So you could argue whether or not that particular one, meaning this one right here, actually exists. And that's where the debate over the existence of heaven is. So if you go ahead and you ask the question, how do we know heaven exists? What I can say is, depending on what your definition is, if you're talking about the place that God exists outside of sort of our space and time understanding, that tons of biblical references, tons of history. It's been believed from the beginning, has hundreds of references to it in the Bible. It'd be really hard to argue that doesn't exist. Same thing stands for an eternity with God after the second coming. Lots of biblical evidence, has been believed pretty much universally, has been believed from the beginning pretty universally. You're good to go. It's this square here, the one that most people mean when they say heaven, that's a little bit more of a question mark, because your early Christians didn't believe it, but post like 300, 400, 500, there's been a significant, if not majority, of Christians who have believed in it. You go to the Bible, you read there, you don't probably have hundreds of references to it, but you probably have 70 or 80 references to it, depending on how you read those references. Hint why it's controversial.
In the New Testament? Are they mostly in the New Testament, or are they in the Old Testament, or?
Those 60, the 60 to 70 are almost exclusively New Testament ones. The ones that are going to exist in the Old Testament are almost all analogies or allegories or things along that line.
Does
So
does the Old Testament though refer to hell?
it
does.
well, as Sheol,
Sheol. Yeah, okay.
which itself is its own, like, you can really argue whether or not hell exists. So the reality is, this is pretty substantiated, and this piece here is pretty substantiated in the Bible. This one is debatable, but you have a lot of evidence. This one is debatable, but you have a lot less evidence. This one has no evidence,
Right.
and is a theological, sort of a theological speculation.
Okay.
So that's sort of where I'd put them on the proof category, if you had to like line them up.
Okay.
This might be a follow-up for later,
Sure.
but I don't remember much about purgatory, but it occurred to me that one of the pub talks from a little while ago, you were talking about redemptive justice and how maybe purgatory is really a similar train of thought, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be curious to hear more about that if you have time later.
Oh, absolutely. We can either put it as its own thing. Purgatory is an intriguing thing. It does have a redemptive justice aspect. It comes obviously from Catholicism, but it is an early Catholic idea trying to get at what I think we would now call redemptive justice. And Karl Rahner, who is a renowned Catholic theologian, would say that purgatory was or is a redemptive justice concept within Catholicism. The problem Lutherans have with purgatory is, if God's grace and faith is what saves us, then isn't it a sort of peeing-like situation of either you have been or you haven't been, and therefore how can you only sort of be saved? But because Catholicism requires an aspect of works to it, because of their understanding of sacramentality, you can have a situation where you're in the process of being saved and then you die, so you need a place to go to finish the process.
So it almost has a bit of like, is it Hinduism or Buddhism, or wouldn't that you come back and you try again and you have your shot at it again, and
right.
You know.
Now,
but I mean, not that purgatory is you get to have another shot, but it's kind of got a little bit of that overlap, a little bit of overlap there. So
yeah, like in Catholicism, if you're a really good person and you're overall meritorious, meaning you've done more good than harm, for a very quick hand. It's much more complicated. You go to
Yeah.
heaven. If you've
Right.
clearly done way more harm than good, and the rest of your life you would never be able to rebalance the scales, you go to hell. Okay, very traditional conservative Catholicism. However, you'd have a whole bunch of folks that are like, well, if they lived another 10 years,
Mhm.
I don't know where they'd end up. They were on their way back. The first half of their life, they sort of messed up a lot and looked like we were headed here, but then they started pulling it out. But wouldn't be comfortable seeing this yet, But that's not how Lutherans look at it, because we say, well, that's got a sense of works righteousness to it, right? Is that you're sort of working your way to heaven at that point, which is why Lutherans have generally stayed away from it. However, I would say that there is a Lutheran way to get into redemptive justice, insofar as we do understand that we are saved, but then salvation itself can be a process, right? Because God is ever refining us to be better. So I would argue from a Lutheran perspective that you can get around the issue of works righteousness if you say that you have been saved, but maybe you have more processing to do after you die.
And
Right, 'cause
that
you can't just
perspective
say-
would probably be that you are working towards salvation, not possibly the other way. Where purgatory, I'm guessing you can go either way at this point. We're trying to sort that out.
I'm not
I don't even
understanding the
know.
question.
So in purgatory, is it ultimately you're going to be in heaven? Or is it purgatory, you may be going to hell? We don't know yet.
In Catholicism, it's an
Yeah.
iffy place. You
It's
could
an
go either
iffy
way.
place.
Right.
Right.
This
So
is-
a
this is-
difference there would be in the Lutheran view, which is in purgatory, but even maybe Lutheranism could be applied to this concept of redemptive justice. In redemptive justice, the idea is you are going to heaven. It's just this is a process of salvation that will get
Right.
you there. You're
Right.
not
Now, I
going
would.
to hell.
Well,
Well-
I would say, in at least my understanding, and again, this is not, the Lutheran Church does not teach redemptive justice. This is my personal theological view. Is that in redemptive justice, there's always a chance for a human, because God seems to value freedom of choice very highly, for you to walk away from the redemptive act. So God says, I will refine you and get you to heaven. You always have the chance to say, you know what, I'm tired of this, I'm out of here.
Right.
So I would say that the intention in my world of a redemptive afterlife would be that as long as you cooperated, you were on your way to heaven, but you always have the chance to say, you know what, I'm drop failing this situation. Now, would anyone do that? I don't know, but I would think the option would always be open, or why would God give the option for evil on earth?
Right.
Now, granted, I am in a very small minority on this, but that's who I am. So, so anyway, so that is the basic answer to the question of the heaven thing. What other things you guys want to talk about? Or I'm gonna stop screen sharing here, I think, so I can get back to seeing you all. There we go. Much better.
So when they talk about, so when we do in whatever it is in the Lord's Prayer or different places, heaven on earth, or that we would bring, basically, there would be,
So
is that what we're waiting for? Or is that already here? Or
So heaven on earth, depending on how it is stated, can have two different meanings historically. The earliest and oldest meaning, that's going to go back to the patristic era, is the idea that God will bring heaven on earth in the final days, and in doing so will have the bodily resurrection. So when you look at the creeds, when they're talking about that, that's what they're referring to. However, St. Augustine, much later, okay, will come up with the idea that part of what we do on earth as Christians is to make the world a better place, and by that slowly inch earth towards a more heaven-like place. Okay, he outlines this in City of God, famous and incredibly long 2,000-odd page book. So if you really want to read something, it's a fascinating read. If you love a mixture of theology and political philosophy, it's great. If that's not your thing, don't even begin it, because it's a thick book. But he outlines this idea that then becomes pretty universal in Christianity, that we are part of God's redemptive act in the world. And obviously there's lots of different ways of taking that, of how necessary, or if we're at all necessary or whatever. And people will split on that. But sometimes when we talk about bringing heaven on earth, it is us being the angels to the world that has fallen around us, especially in later writings. It could also mean that.
Not being serious all the time. As Wisconsinites, is there beer in heaven?
Of course, because Martin Luther's there.
Heck
So-
yeah, he's
Oh,
probably
that's right.
brewing
Okay.
it.
In heaven, there is no beer. That's why we drink it here.
I had to learn that song for my German class in German.
Did you really?
Yes.
In
It's
German.
like
Oh.
in Himmel nie keins nie Biers. Anyways, my German is completely atrophied over the years. I took like 3 or 4 years of it in high
My
school.
hoot is Dreiken. Dreiken is my hoot.
You got your hoop. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Oh, the hoop song. Yeah. Like I said, it is awful. Like I would be hard pressed to be remotely useful as a translator or even read anything these days.
So I was watching this episode of on Netflix, and this guy thought his girlfriend was Danish, so he couldn't understand her. They couldn't understand each other, and his friend met her for the first time, and she, like, I don't know if he said something in German, or I don't know how it figured it out, but he's talking to her in German, and she's responding in German, but still the boyfriend doesn't realize that that's what they're talking in his German. He still thinks it's Danish. So, but his friend never clues him in until real much later that she really is German. She's not Danish at all. I mean, not that he could understand her anyway. He knew she was German, but it was just funny. So
That's
anyway.
hilarious.
Mr. Matt, which theory do you subscribe to? You kind of presented them, but what's
Oh, the immortal versus mortal soul theory. I
Yeah.
actually believe in the immortality of the soul. So I would believe that when we die, we go to heaven, and we stay there. And then in the final days, we will leave heaven and come back to earth in the bodily resurrection. This is a great fun point I debate with my dad, because he is very much an advocate of the soul sleep idea. So the
I've
two of
noticed-
us enjoy debating that out.
All goes to
I
sleep.
noticed you and your father really like debating, don't you?
We
Yeah, 'cause
do.
Isn't he like, what was he? It was not the justice, it was the other. He was, oh yeah, because he was like, when we were talking about that a couple times ago, you said he differs in that as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
And
gotta
that's all part of what this is too. I mean, this whole discussion. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And no, because my dad would say that you either blink into exist, you either are resurrected or you just aren't.
Hmm.
Now I think he's more of a universalist, so he'd probably say everyone or nearly everyone, or
Goes to heaven, right?
well, he would
There's
say,
no
because he doesn't
Oh.
believe in the in between heaven, he would say that everyone gets resurrected on the final day. We're all made perfect, or nearly all made perfect. He's always a little squishy on that, because he doesn't want me to be like, well, what about, and then pick someone horrible.
And are there levels? Are there still levels that you could attain to? Is that, I mean, is, like, perfect heaven versus, in between versus, entry level?
In my
entry level?
opinion, or in his opinion?
I don't know. I mean, anybody, your opinion, his opinion.
Oh, so none of the churches teach the level idea. That actually is an ancient idea that resurfaces every so often. It gets traced back to I want to say Irenaeus. I might be wrong in that. One of the early church fathers advocated the idea that heaven was the temple of a city, and that the city, and say a tier. So you either lived in the temple with God, or you lived in the city near God, or you lived in the countryside far from God, but all were places of perfection.
Okay.
But each part was more perfect than the other. So you had a tiered system, which is very Jewish, because you would have the temple and then Jerusalem and then not Jerusalem. But that never really caught on in Christianity. But because those writings are out there, they do occasionally, somebody reads them and runs with it. So I've run into people who say, well, I think there's tiers to heaven or tiers to hell. The other place that comes from is Dante's Inferno had tiers to hell.
Yes.
And ancient Greek philosophy and Greek religiosity, from which obviously runs into it, would have had tears to Hades.
I've never heard of this idea of tears to heaven. Well, now that I say it out loud, it's kind of interesting. Tears in heaven. Anyway, definitely Dante.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the more perfect that
Well-
comes up again. Well, come on.
Well, that's sort of
It's
where I go.
binary.
I'm with you on this. I'm not sure it's binary. I'm always for flexibility on things, but Tears of Heaven, I don't buy it, because like, how perfect is perfect? There isn't perfect and more perfect, because if you're more perfect.
You cut out there, Pastor Matt.
Oh,
But yeah,
so-
you can't be more perfect than perfect.
right? I'm with you on that, and that's probably one of the many reasons it never really caught on in Christianity. But like any idea in any field, it has a tendency to resurrect itself every so many years, because someone stumbles across the writing and goes, "Oh my God, I've never heard this before. It's
So
cool and it's new."
is heaven integrated or segregated?
I would only imagine everyone's there, and a lot of folks are super surprised to see who else is there with them.
This is kind of a sad thing, but Matt, what about miscarriages and stillborns? I mean, because I've had a few of those in my life. How's that fit into the heaven ideal?
So that is something that is debatable between denominations. But for me, I go back to an early church father. So, and I'm blanking on his name. I'd have to look him up. But he is a bishop in Asia Minor. Okay. So what we would know as Turkey, and he's in what we would know as the Kurdish parts of Turkey. So Eastern Turkey. And the Roman government at the time has rolling persecutions of Christians going on. Okay. This is not the major persecutions that come later. This is sort of a local persecution going on. And this is prior to having church buildings. So they're out in a field. It's Easter morning. The 40 days prior was a time in which if you were going to convert in for baptismal, to be baptized, you did 40 days of instruction. Okay. And so you have 5,000 odd people gathering in this field. He's going to baptize like hundreds of people, young, old, whatever. Okay. And just as he's beginning, he looks up at a hill and he sees the Roman cavalry is there waiting for him. Someone has tipped off the Romans that the Christians were gathering. Romans come, they stomp down, they kill as many people as they can. Everyone runs for the hills. And a number of months later, they regather in the catacombs, okay? Because that's where the Christians hung out. We hid out in sewer systems. We hid out in graveyards. So they regather, and the question is posed to him. Were those people who showed up that day, because you never got to the baptismal rite, are they saved? And he has this famous writing in which his response is, they were saved in the water of their own tears and the tears of those who loved them. And throughout most of the patristic era, that becomes this really hard and fast rule for what happens if you're martyred before you do the baptismal rite. This then becomes this little jewel about martyrship that exists throughout Catholicism. Catholicism, to its credit, keeps this writing alive in canon law, but they limit it initially only to martyrdom. Okay, which obviously over time becomes a less and less of a situation, right, for Christians. But I think in there, and this is something that it's not just me, I would say that there's a large bunch within mainline Christianity and a growing consciousness within Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox, that wouldn't just apply to martyrship, because it isn't that they martyred themselves, right? That isn't what made it happen. It was, as the church father outlined, it was because the intent of those who loved them was for a Christian life. The intent of what they were headed towards, and neither of those would have happened, okay, had faith not already existed. Especially with our Lutheran understanding that God is the person who puts that faith there, that it is not our work, that fits really well into our understanding of grace, right? And so to me, I would say that when you're talking stillborns or babies who die before they're baptized, as long as the parents mourn the child, as long as there was some hope amongst the community that that child would grow up and would have a spiritual life, that they too are saved.
That's good to
Because
hear.
it's not works. There was
That's
faith
good to hear,
already
'cause,
there.
he was a grandchild, and they had a funeral, and Pastor
Mhm.
Mark was buried. But that's good to hear. So thank you.
No, and um no, and I would say that that has been a real pastoral and theological awakening within Lutheranism within the past number of generations. So if you went back to the silent generation of Lutherans, so that'd be my grandfather's generation, so those who would now be in their 80s, 90s, okay, generation just older than baby boomers. That generation was mostly taught that stillborns and stuff like that weren't ensouled or didn't go to heaven. And I think
That's
that
what I
did,
grew up in. That's
yeah,
the generation I grew up in Missouri Synod. That's what we were taught. Yeah.
yeah. And I think it's just
But it
tragic.
goes, but what you're just describing just now goes along with even a child who is alive, a
Mhm,
baby,
mhm.
being baptized, having not made having not themselves chosen to be
Absolutely.
baptized, but their parents or their sponsors having chosen for them to be baptized. So again, there's faith existing there,
Mhm.
not that that child has spoken that faith, but that,
Right.
so it really connects that way. And so for
Absolutely.
us to, so for a belief to say, well, a child can be, if the child is baptized, then they're saved, but a stillborn or,
Right.
right. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. And I think to me that's part of what is really good about being an ELCA Lutheran is we have this really cool understanding that God is the actor, not us,
Right.
especially when it comes to sacramentality.
Right.
Which means what I'm doing at a baptism isn't so much that I am baptizing that child as I am confirming, or not even really confirming. I don't know quite the best word. I'd say proclaiming what God is already doing or
Right.
already done.
Affirming
Right.
Like, you know,
commitment to the baptized.
what?
You're affirming our commitment to the baptized to raise in the faith and placing
Yeah,
their, you know.
right. But you wouldn't have that if God wasn't already leading you down there. So the way I like to think about it is like when it comes to weddings, right? You like a wedding's a beautiful, wonderful, awesome thing, and yeah, there's legal side, but from a theological standpoint, not they aren't fundamentally different the day before and the day after the wedding, right? Like you were hopefully just as committed the day before the wedding as you were the day after the wedding.
Right.
Um, and so what are you doing at the wedding? Well, you're really confirming what has already occurred. It isn't like people go to the wedding and they're like, "Oh, I guess I fell in love today. Let's get married." Or at least hopefully that's not what's going on. Hopefully they've already fallen in love. They already have the relationship. They already have built that connection. You already have two on the process of becoming one, or whatever metaphor you want to do, and you're confirming what has occurred.
So what if the child was not mourned, maybe not even known?
Right.
I wonder about that, because then if we say that it's because they were mourned, isn't that almost an act of a human? Where you would think that God is the one who is able to have complete control and shows grace.
And I was quoting him, and that is a weakness in his argument.
Okay.
And I would honestly go, my counter to that would be that you're right, that's a really, you're absolutely right, that's a weakness in his argument. But he wasn't talking about stillborns in his case. Okay. So I'd say the natural extension would be that God mourns the death of anyone.
He mourns his creation,
Exactly.
whoever it be, whatever it be, he mourns his creation. When
Absolutely. And we can see that in things like Noah. Like he looks after he destroys the world and says, "Oh my God, what did I?" Or oh my God, what did I do? I'm never going to do that again. And there's multiple times in which he looks at creation or looks at humanity or looks at the people of Israel or whatever, and his heart breaks. And so since we see this constant stream of love, I would think that in any scenario like that, God's heart would break too. So to me, I think, anytime I've ever been asked to do something like a funeral for a stillborn or for a child that's lost, I've always said absolutely and treated it with the same level of respect and dignity that I would any person's funeral.
Thanks. That's very comforting, and I'll have to share this with my kids who had a stillborn. So
Absolutely. Any other questions? I mean, this is the best. See, I think this is the best part of Pub-Theology is when we just chat. Like, I can do my little spiels.
I had to have a little giggle when you said someone who lost their arm, they wouldn't be able to, I don't know, something about it. It made me think of The Mummy, the movie The Mummy, where where he grabs one arm, gets caught, broken off, and he's like going like this, trying to find his owner, and then once somebody else picks it up and uses it.
well, with Invisible Man going to heaven, he didn't have a body.
Anyway, I love that movie. I always have to,
It's a
doesn't
funny
matter
movie.
when it's on, that one and the sequel, I love both of them. But
I love your head shake, Marianne.
Yes, not just like,
I happened to see one of the Mummy sequels in a theater in Frankfurt, actually, to bring it all around to German. So I had not seen the original Mummy movies, but I got to see one of them in German and was probably more lost than I could keep up with it. It's just the Mummy, it's action. I understood enough German to make sense of it.
There's the Scorpion King, and then they tried to kind of reboot the Mummy after the first two. They kind of tried to reboot it with some other people, and it kind of didn't quite fly. But the first two I kind of really enjoy the most. So, but
I have
Yeah,
to
I think
start.
I saw the second one.
that's the one where the Scorpion King, they raise the Scorpion King, and he brings his
Yeah.
army.
That'd be the one then.
Yeah, that army's made out of, and then eventually those poor guys have to battle that army, and then they have to, and then the army is just about to be resurrected, and then they finally able to kill the Scorpion King and send them back to where they came from. So, but
So they get a little Bible thrown in the resurrection, right?
oh yeah, yeah.
I have to start watching movies, I guess.
So do you think Abraham is in heaven with God? I mean, did Abraham get to go?
Well, see, Abraham dies. So the reason like Elijah is questionable is because carried up in chariot.
Chariot, right?
So
And that's in the Mummy. That's in the Mummy. Just so you know.
Did Elijah die?
Oh, I see.
Right? Or is Elijah somehow in heaven immortally with God? And Jesus says to Peter and James and John, "You guys will sit on my right hand, one on my left." You know what I'm saying? So does that mean so if you have this idea that, if you have my dad's idea that you go to sleep and then you're there, then you have to answer like this handful of folks who don't die in the Bible, who either get carried up or swept away or go up in a whirlwind. Are they in heaven? And if so, it's like I don't know. I think it's like 8 people or something when you count them all together or something.
Is that why the Jews are waiting for Elijah to come back?
Well, that's why
they have the place always reserved. They're waiting for Elijah.
Right. And Elijah is supposed to come back as
Right.
to indicate the coming of the Messiah, which is why Transfiguration Sunday is so important, because that is Elijah coming back to announce that Jesus is in fact the Christ.
Right.
So is John the Baptist our Elijah?
That's what they thought.
Well, okay, so John the Baptist is the one that Micah talks about, who's supposed to come prior to, but Elijah is supposed to confirm who the Messiah is according to
I see.
prophecy.
I see.
When they have Moses and Elijah, and yeah,
Okay. The validator.
the validator, stamp of approval.
I think there's a movie there, The Validator.
I feel like the and
Instead of
any
the
word is
Terminator.
now a movie on Netflix. If it
All right,
isn't, it will be soon.
So I've been not, I wouldn't say binging, but I have gone back and started watching Ugly Betty again. And I have to say, I forgot how much I enjoyed that show. So that was a nice, I don't know if anybody's ever watched that series, but that was good. So anyway.
well, if
No,
you
No,
want
I
to-
think it got some good critical praise though, didn't it?
It did. You know, they did some good things in it, I have to say. They did, you know, for its, you know, it was 12 or 13 years ago, I think, when it came on. So I think it did some good things. So yeah,